Have you ever wondered what it takes to break down the emotional walls of someone who's supposed to be the strongest person in the room? What if I told you that a 7-year-old boy, wearing shoes with holes and carrying a lunch made of yesterday's leftovers, would be the one to shatter every defense that Mrs. Henderson had built over 23 years of teaching? What happens when innocence meets wisdom, and a child's words become more powerful than any sermon, any lecture, any speech you've ever heard? This is the story of little Marcus Thompson, a quiet boy who sat in the back corner of classroom 4B at Lincoln Elementary School. Most days, you wouldn't even notice him there. He never raised his hand, never caused trouble, never demanded attention like the other kids who fought for every moment in the spotlight. His clothes were always clean but worn, his backpack held together with duct tape, and his lunch consisted of whatever his grandmother could scrape together from their nearly empty refrigerator. Mrs. Henderson had seen thousands of students walk through her classroom doors over the years. She prided herself on being fair, professional, and emotionally stable. She was the teacher other teachers came to when they needed advice, the one parents requested specifically for their children, the rock that never crumbled no matter how challenging the day became. Her colleagues often joked that she was made of steel, that nothing could shake her composure or make her lose control of her emotions in front of her students. But today was different. Today, something was going to happen that would change not just Mrs. Henderson, but every person who witnessed it. It started like any other Tuesday morning in October. The autumn leaves were painting the world in shades of gold and crimson outside the classroom windows, and the children were settling into their morning routine. Mrs. Henderson was preparing for their weekly sharing circle where each student had the opportunity to talk about something meaningful in their life. It was a tradition she had maintained for years, believing that every child deserved to be heard and valued. "All right, everyone, please form a circle on the reading carpet," Mrs. Henderson announced, her voice carrying the familiar authority that had guided countless students through their elementary years. The children scrambled from their desks, chattering excitedly as they found their spots on the colorful carpet. Some were eager to share stories about weekend adventures, new pets, or upcoming family vacations. Marcus remained in his seat, as he always did during sharing time. Week after week, he would politely decline when his turn came, simply shaking his head and passing the talking stick to the next student. Mrs. Henderson had learned not to pressure him, respecting his shy nature and assuming he simply wasn't comfortable speaking in front of the group. "Marcus, sweetie, would you like to join us today?" she asked gently, the same invitation she extended every week, expecting the same quiet refusal she had grown accustomed to receiving. For a moment, Marcus didn't move. His small hands were folded on his desk, his eyes fixed on a worn spot in the wood grain. The other children turned to look at him, some with curiosity, others with the casual indifference that children often show toward their quieter classmates. Mrs. Henderson was about to move on when something unexpected happened. Marcus looked up. His eyes, usually cast downward or staring out the window, met Mrs. Henderson's directly. There was something different in his gaze today, something that made her pause mid-breath. It wasn't the usual shyness or hesitation she had come to expect. Instead, there was a gravity, a weight that seemed far too heavy for a 7-year-old to carry. "Actually, Mrs. Henderson," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent classroom, "I think I would like to share something today." The surprise on Mrs. Henderson's face was evident to everyone in the room. In all her years of teaching, she had learned to read children like open books, but Marcus had always remained a mystery to her. She had tried countless times to draw him out, to understand the quiet boy who seemed to observe the world with ancient eyes, but he had always remained just beyond her reach. "Of course, Marcus," she said, her voice gentle but tinged with curiosity. "We would all love to hear what you have to share." Marcus stood up slowly, his chair scraping softly against the linoleum floor. He walked toward the circle with measured steps, each movement deliberate and purposeful. The other children shifted to make room for him, their usual chatter replaced by an unusual quiet that seemed to acknowledge the significance of this moment. As he settled cross-legged on the carpet, Marcus looked around the circle at his classmates. These were children he had shared a classroom with for 2 months, children who knew his name but little else about him. Some had tried to befriend him in the beginning of the year, but his quiet nature and reluctance to engage had eventually led them to stop trying. Mrs. Henderson handed him the talking stick, a decorated piece of driftwood that had been passed from student to student for years. As Marcus's small fingers wrapped around it, she noticed how his hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of whatever he was about to share. "My name is Marcus Thompson," he began, though everyone in the room already knew this. His voice was steady now, growing stronger with each word. "And I want to tell you about my mom." Mrs. Henderson felt something shift in the atmosphere of the room. She had reviewed Marcus's file at the beginning of the year and knew that he lived with his grandmother, that his mother was listed as not in the home, but the details had been sparse. She had assumed it was a typical custody arrangement, perhaps a mother working multiple jobs or dealing with personal challenges. "My mom isn't like other moms," Marcus continued, his young voice carrying a maturity that seemed impossible for his age. "She doesn't pick me up from school or help me with my homework. She doesn't make me breakfast or tuck me into bed at night." Some of the children shifted uncomfortably, sensing that this wasn't going to be the usual, light-hearted sharing they were accustomed to. Mrs. Henderson felt a tightening in her chest, a protective instinct awakening as she prepared to intervene if the story became too personal or painful for a 7-year-old to share in front of his peers. "She lives in a place where she can't leave whenever she wants to," Marcus said, his words carefully chosen with the precision of a child who has had to explain complicated adult situations before. "There are bars on the windows and locks on the doors, and she has to wear the same clothes every day." The realization hit Mrs. Henderson like a physical blow. Marcus's mother was in prison. This sweet, quiet boy had been carrying the weight of this reality every single day, sitting in her classroom with a secret that most adults would struggle to bear, let alone a child. "But that's not the important part," Marcus said, and Mrs. Henderson found herself leaning forward, drawn in by the unexpected direction his story was taking. "The important part is what she told me the last time I got to see her." His small hands gripped the talking stick tighter, and Mrs. Henderson noticed tears beginning to form in his eyes, though his voice remained steady and clear. "She told me that even though she made mistakes, even though she couldn't be the mom she wanted to be right now, she wanted me to remember something very important." Marcus paused, looking around the circle at his classmates, who were now completely absorbed in his words. "She said that every single person in the world is fighting a battle that nobody else can see." The silence in the room was profound. Even the usually restless children sat perfectly still, instinctively understanding that they were witnessing something significant. "She told me that the kid who's mean to others might be hungry at home. The teacher who seems strict might be worried about someone they love. The person who cuts in line might have just gotten terrible news." Marcus's voice began to crack slightly, but he pressed on with determination. "She said that if we could see inside everyone's heart, if we could see all the scared and sad and worried parts, we would never be mean to anyone ever again." Mrs. Henderson felt her breath catch in her throat. In 23 years of teaching, she had heard countless stories, witnessed innumerable moments of childhood triumph and struggle, but nothing had prepared her for the profound wisdom flowing from this 7-year-old's lips. "My mom made mistakes," Marcus continued, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks, though his voice remained strong. "Big mistakes that hurt people and broke the law. But she's still a person with feelings and fears and love in her heart, and every day she thinks about me and hopes I'm being kind to people, even when I don't know what battles they're fighting." The boy, who had never spoken during sharing time, who had remained invisible in the back of the classroom for months, was now commanding the attention of every person in the room with a message that cut straight to the heart of human compassion and understanding. "So when Tommy takes my pencil without asking," Marcus said, glancing at a boy across the circle who had the grace to look ashamed, "I try to remember that maybe he forgot his pencils because his family was rushing to get somewhere important. And when Sarah seems bossy during group work, he looked at another classmate with gentle eyes. I try to remember that maybe she's worried about doing well, because someone at home will be disappointed if she doesn't. Mrs. Henderson felt something breaking open inside her chest, a floodgate of emotion that she had kept carefully controlled for decades of professional composure. This child, this beautiful, wise, wounded child, was teaching her colleagues and classmates a lesson about empathy that most adults never fully learn. My grandma says that my mom is learning how to be better while she's away, Marcus said, his small shoulders straightening with pride despite his tears. And she's teaching me how to be better too, even from far away. She's teaching me that the most important thing we can do is try to understand each other's invisible battles. The talking stick trembled in his hands as he prepared to finish his sharing. I know I'm different from a lot of you. I know my lunch isn't as good as yours, and my clothes aren't as new, and I don't get picked up by a mom and dad every day after school. But I have something that my mom gave me, even from where she is now. I have the knowledge that everyone I meet is carrying something heavy, and the least I can do is try not to make their load any heavier. He looked directly at Mrs. Henderson then, his young eyes holding depths of understanding that seemed impossible for his age. Mrs. Henderson, I see you trying so hard to take care of all of us every day. I see you staying late to make sure our work gets graded, and coming in early to set up fun activities, and worrying when one of us is struggling. You carry the invisible battle of caring about 30 kids every single day, and I want you to know that I notice. I want you to know that even though I don't talk very much, I see how hard you work to help us learn and grow and feel safe here. That was the moment when Mrs. Henderson's carefully constructed professional composure finally crumbled. The tears came suddenly and without warning, flowing down her cheeks as 23 years of emotional restraint gave way to the pure, overwhelming truth of what this child had just shared. She had spent her entire career maintaining appropriate boundaries, being the adult in the room, staying strong for her students no matter what challenges they faced. But Marcus's words had reached into a place in her heart that she had kept locked away, a place where she stored her own invisible battles. The sleepless nights worrying about struggling students, the personal sacrifices she made to give her classroom the resources it needed, the weight of responsibility she carried for each child's academic and emotional growth, the loneliness of being the strong one who never got to show vulnerability. "Oh, Marcus," she whispered through her tears, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for teaching all of us something so important." The other children in the circle watched in stunned silence as their unflappable teacher openly wept. Some began crying themselves, moved by the raw emotion of the moment and the profound truth of Marcus's words. Others sat in contemplative silence, their young minds processing a lesson about empathy and understanding that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Marcus set down the talking stick and without hesitation walked over to Mrs. Henderson. His small arms wrapped around her shoulders in a hug that conveyed more comfort and understanding than any words could express. She held him close, this remarkable child who had just taught her more about compassion and humanity than any professional development workshop or educational conference ever could. "We all have invisible battles," he whispered into her ear, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone far beyond his 7 years. "But we don't have to fight them alone." As Mrs. Henderson held Marcus, she looked around the circle at her other students. She saw them with new eyes now, understanding that each of them carried their own invisible struggles. Tommy, who took things without asking, lived with grandparents who struggled to provide school supplies. Sarah, who seemed bossy, was dealing with her parents' recent divorce and felt the need to control something in her uncertain world. Each child had their own story, their own battles, their own need for understanding and compassion. The sharing circle that day lasted longer than usual. Inspired by Marcus's courage and wisdom, other students began opening up about their own struggles. They talked about fears and worries, about family challenges and personal insecurities. What had started as a routine classroom activity had transformed into a powerful moment of human connection and understanding. When the circle finally ended and the students returned to their regular activities, the atmosphere in classroom 4B had permanently changed. The children were kinder to each other, more patient, more understanding. They had learned that everyone, including their teacher, was fighting battles that couldn't be seen on the surface. Mrs. Henderson found herself approaching her work differently after that day. She looked at each difficult behavior, each struggling student, each challenging moment through the lens of invisible battles. Her discipline became more compassionate, her teaching more personalized, her relationships with students deeper and more meaningful. Marcus continued to be quiet, but he was no longer invisible. His classmates sought him out for his gentle wisdom and kind heart. Teachers throughout the school heard about the day he made Mrs. Henderson cry and began inviting him to share his insights with their students too. What had started as one boy's courage to share his truth had rippled outward, creating waves of empathy and understanding throughout the entire school community. Word of Marcus's message spread beyond the school walls. Parents heard about it from their children at dinner tables, and many found themselves reevaluating how they interacted with others in their daily lives. The story made its way to the school board, to the local newspaper, and eventually to social media, where it touched the hearts of people around the world. But for Marcus, the most important outcome was simpler and more personal. A few weeks after his sharing circle, he received a letter from his mother. His grandmother had written to tell her about what Marcus had shared at school, about how he had carried her lesson about invisible battles into the world and used it to teach others about compassion and understanding. In her letter, his mother wrote, "My dear Marcus, you have taken the hardest lesson life has taught us and turned it into something beautiful. You have shown that even from the most difficult circumstances, wisdom and love can grow. You have made me proud beyond words, and you have proven that distance and circumstances cannot break the bond between a mother and her child. Keep fighting the good fight, keep seeing the invisible battles, and keep spreading the love and understanding that make this world a better place." Mrs. Henderson kept a copy of Marcus's words written on a card in her desk drawer. On difficult days when students were challenging and lessons weren't going as planned, she would read it and remember the profound truth that a 7-year-old had taught her. Everyone is fighting battles that others cannot see, and the most powerful thing we can do is approach each other with kindness, understanding, and compassion. The ripple effects of that one sharing circle continued long after Marcus moved on to the next grade. Mrs. Henderson changed her approach to teaching, incorporating more opportunities for students to share their stories and understand each other's experiences. She began professional development workshops for other teachers, sharing Marcus's message about invisible battles and helping educators create more compassionate classroom environments. Years later, when Marcus graduated from high school as a valedictorian, he chose to speak about that day in Mrs. Henderson's classroom. He talked about how one moment of courage to share his truth had changed not only his own life but the lives of everyone around him. He emphasized that his mother, his wisdom about invisible battles had become the foundation of his approach to life, guiding him through his own challenges and helping him support others through theirs. Mrs. Henderson was in the audience that day, tears streaming down her face once again as she listened to the young man who had once been a quiet boy in her classroom. His words had evolved and matured, but the core message remained the same. We are all fighting battles that others cannot see, and our greatest opportunity is to meet each other with compassion, understanding, and love. The story of the day Marcus made his teacher cry became legend at Lincoln Elementary School. It was told to new students, shared with new teachers, and passed down through generations of families who attended the school. It became a reminder that wisdom can come from the most unexpected sources, that vulnerability can be strength, and that the most profound truths often come from the mouths of children who see the world with clear eyes and open hearts. Marcus's message about invisible battles became more than just a classroom lesson. It became a way of life for everyone who heard it. It reminded them to be patient with the difficult customer, to be kind to the grumpy neighbor, to be understanding with the struggling colleague. It taught them that behind every harsh word or difficult behavior is a human being carrying burdens that others cannot see. As Marcus grew older and eventually became a social worker, dedicating his life to helping others navigate their own invisible battles, he never forgot that October day in Mrs. Henderson's classroom. He never forgot the power of sharing his truth, the courage it took to be vulnerable, and the profound impact that one moment of authentic connection can have on the world. If you've been moved by Marcus's story, if his mother's wisdom about invisible battles has touched your heart, then you understand the power of empathy and compassion to change lives. Stories like this remind us that we all have the ability to make a difference in someone's day, to see beyond the surface to the human heart beneath, and to respond to each other's struggles with kindness rather than judgment. Don't let this story end here. Subscribe to Top Life Stories for more powerful tales that will challenge your perspective, touch your heart, and remind you of the incredible resilience and wisdom of the human spirit. Together, we can create a world where everyone's invisible battles are met with understanding, where every story matters, and where compassion becomes our default response to the struggles we all face.